Recently, a person on Instagram asked me if I could create them a VRoid Avatar model for free. And since I only ever created one VRoid Avatar model myself, like any sensible human being would do, I said yes. So they sent me a reference image and I got started. As you can probably tell, we're dealing with a character that's a mixture of two characters. Feel free to guess in the comments which ones those are. And without further ado, let's see if I manage to pull off something halfway decent looking. Let's go. And if you're wondering why we're not starting at the beginning, well, I may or may not have forgotten to press record at the beginning, so yeah, we're kind of missing 10-15 minutes here, but really all you missed was the eyelashes, and yeah, that's about it. And no, we're not using the 1.0 version here. This video was recorded before the 1.0 version released, so that's why the UI looks a little outdated here. And I know if I don't answer this right now, someone's gonna ask how I did the whole two hair color thing. And it's actually quite easy. I did it with the built-in shader. You know, the thing that everyone always tells you not to use for how bad it looks. So I essentially just changed the shadow color to a pastel purple and the highlight color to a blonde. And on that way, the shadow area is always going to be purple, and that's kind of the look that I wanted to go for. Here's a little tip for the future. If someone tells you to not use a tool because it doesn't do anything good, then there's a good chance that they just don't know how it works. Whatever. Once I was done with the blushing, I went straight to the face texture, and the first thing I did is to paint over all the shading around the eyes, the nose and the mouth with a solid skin color, just to make sure that the skin looks as flat as possible. I also went over the nose and mouth to make it look a little bit more like 2D outlines. Not that there's per se anything wrong with the standard, but it just looks a little bit too plastic for my liking, especially since I'm going more for a 2D look instead of 3D. When I went to the eyes, I disabled the highlight layers because I decided to draw in the highlights into the texture themselves instead of separate. Of course, I used the symmetry drawing for the eyes just to save me some time and some hassle. I simply did the color gradient of the eye with some soft brushes. That was really not a problem. The horizontal lines were a little bit tricky, but thanks to the built-in brushes, I could just erase them in a way that it looked just right, so it wasn't all that hard. Then for the highlights, I did disable the symmetry drawing just to make sure that both the highlights on both eyes are facing into the right direction. If I didn't do that, then we would have had highlights facing into opposite directions, which I guess can make sense depending on where the light source would be, but it just looks more natural if they're facing the same direction. You're probably also noticing that the reference has two different eye colors, whereas my creation only has one eye color. That was actually on purpose because recoloring is very simple. You simply create a new top layer, set the blend mode to color, and then draw over with a new solid color to recolor the eye. It's very simple process. My next step was to adjust the shape and the position of both the eyes and the entire face to match it as close as I could to the reference. It was a lot of micro adjustments really, but I think at the end I did a pretty good job. Also at this point I should probably mention that the entire process of creating this character was done with the mouse and keyboard. I think that's just a true testament that professional equipment is by no means an entry barrier for digital art at all. Next up are the expressions, and it was really just a lot of sliding sliders around and it was kind of boring, so I'll just spare you that and get you right to the finished expressions. Neutral, fun, sorrow, angry, joy, surprise, blink, A, I, U, E, O. And now we come to the meat of the package, the hair. And maybe a slight seizure warning here. I will be cross-referencing a lot, so it's gonna look like the screen is flickering. So if you're super sensitive to that, you might want to skip ahead 1 or 2 minutes, just to be sure. Of course, I started out by giving the hairnet an appropriate length and shape. I was using the symmetry drawing tool for almost the entire first layer of the hair, which does make sense since the reference hair was also almost completely symmetrical. But the hardest part is really to translate a 2D image, which obviously doesn't fully account for 3D space, and convert it into a 3D environment. Like that's really hard. Like it's really not easy to get it to look just right. If you're struggling with an individual hair strand, you can always just go into it and adjust its spline manually, like I'm doing right here. You don't have to do it perfect with a stroke. You can always adjust it in post. The way I approached the hair in general was to do the bigger strands first and get those accurate, and then fill the empty area in between with smaller individual strands. On that way I could assure to get the shape of the hair right first and not waste my time with too much of the small details. It was still quite the fight though, especially since I had to make sure that none of the hair was clipping into the body, because that can cause some issues with the spring bone physics later on, so you gotta make sure that nothing's clipping into each other. Towards the back I got a little more careless. I only did the bigger strands and didn't really care for the smaller details, because you know it's the back, you don't really see it that much, and I also couldn't see it in the reference well, so I was like, yeah, whatever, let's just keep it like that. Alright, next up is the texture. And the amount of times I've read online and heard of people that they can't create their own avatars because they just can't draw or whatever, like, just look at how much finesse I'm drawing the texture here. Like, I'm literally just taking a solid and drawing over it. That's as simple as it is. Like, you can probably get away by having just a simple, plain, solid color as a texture. I'm not even kidding. You know, the beauty about being an artist is not that you work hard, but that you work smart. If there's a shortcut you can take, you want to take it. Trust me. And then for the highlights, I did some squiggly lines. Like, it's no rocket science, it's really that simple. And then I disabled the built-in shader highlights, because I already drew my own. Then I went to offset the shader texture so the highlight is in a straight line. I had to do that strand by strand, there wasn't a way to do it any quicker. It's not hard, just a little tedious is all. And after enabling the outline for the hair, we already have a pretty looking anime girl. But we're not done yet. Next up is the body and the clothing. But before we get there, it's time to talk about today's sponsor. No, just kidding. I do want to mention though that I'm quite frequently live on Twitch, where I sometimes create digital art like this awesome Smash Bros. Style video overlay. But most of the time we're really just playing games there. But if you like what you're seeing, then make sure to check out the link in the description or type in twitch.tv/toastport97. Too late for what? Okay.
I, Siegward of the Knights of Katarina, fight by your side.
Wow, Simon. Well, you were fucking around up there instead of fighting the big guy.
Because I thought maybe I was...
I've died to pretty much every boss in this game, except that guy. And you died to him in the first 2 seconds of the fight.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't die to the boss. I pretty much fell off.
I mean, you wouldn't have fallen off if the boss hadn't.
I mean, I've walked off plenty cliffs in this game so far.
That's true, but that doesn't... You're not helping your point, Simon. You're not making it better.
Alright, let's continue with the video. With the body texture, I did pretty much the exact same thing that I did with the face texture, which is to draw over all the pre-baked shadow areas with a solid skin color. Then for the clothing, I went on a little shopping tour on booth.pm. It was kind of fun, not gonna lie. I was pretty much just downloading everything that got me a little closer to my reference than, well, nothing. So yeah, I pretty much just downloaded almost the entire site, at least that's what it feels like. You gotta keep in mind that this was also the first time I was doing clothing in VRoid Studios, so I didn't have any idea what I was looking for. But I ended up settling for this one. Don't ask me what it says. I couldn't tell you even if I wanted to. This is the item ID, 2876404. There you go. After I slapped it on, I noticed that the booba were a bit... yeah, luckily that's an easy fix. You simply draw over the texture and fill the hole. But then I also noticed that the skirt was too short. And to solve that, I decided to export the entire texture and do further edits in GIMP. I expanded the texture downwards and did some recoloring. For anyone who knows how to do image manipulation, this is pretty trivial, so I won't go into further detail about it. I mean, you can see what I did on screen. After some tweaking with the dress, I also added a little schoolgirl skirt. Well, that's a tongue twister. Luckily, that one was already included in VRoid Studio, so that wasn't a big deal. And after that, it was finally time for the last step, refining the hair. Pretty much what I did was I created some extra freehand groups and just drew in some smaller hair strands wherever I saw fit. That was a fairly simple process, you just gotta make sure that it looks natural. Then, as you can see here, I also created an extra freehand group, or I guess two actually, that face upwards. And I did that so I could create hair strands that were like kind of jumping up out of the head instead of just pointing straight down. I just personally think it looks a little more natural if not all the hair is like pointing straight down, but that's obviously up to preference and you can do whatever you want, but I just felt like it looked a little more natural. And then for the physics, I had the software auto-generate the jiggle bones. Yeah, I know, that's super funny, but that's actually what they're called. And you can technically just have them auto-generate and leave it at that, but I went in and tweaked all of them just to make sure that they look exactly the way I want them to be. But if you don't know how that works, you can probably just leave them at default and it's probably gonna look just fine. And that about sums it up. What do you think of the result? Do you think I nailed it or do you think there's still some work left to be done? Let me know in the comments below. Keep in mind though that this was only my second attempt at a VRoid avatar, so please don't be too harsh. I'm personally really happy with the result, though I do think that the lack of detail on the clothing is really holding it back. Oh, speaking of clothing, I did end up adjusting the shading on the clothing the same way I did with the hair, just to make the overall appearance a little more consistent. Oh, and please don't ask me if I can create you one for free too. This was kind of a one-off thing, I won't do it again. If you really want one, then I'll need to charge you for it. I'm sorry, it's just too much work to do for free. Or you know, you could just take this video as an inspiration to get started yourself. However, thanks for watching. I hope you had fun and you learned something. Have a good one. Bye bye.